My name is Alberto Huertas Jr., and I am also known as Ozzy. I'm the Assistant Commissioner of Construction Safety Compliance. I'm also here with the Director of Construction Safety Standards and Guidance, Patricia Fernandez. Over the next few days, this presentation will be translated and presented in Spanish, Mandarin, and Polish. We also have the Director of Construction Safety Compliance, Ronald Menner, the Assistant Chief of Inspections of Construction Safety Compliance, Christian Gandolfo, and the Curriculum Developer of Buildings University, Wilson Ortiz. We have a lot of information to share with you today, and at the end of today's presentation, you will have an understanding of Local Law 196 and the corresponding site safety training that is required. You will also be provided with an overview on New York State COVID-19 guidance on protecting yourself and others from COVID-19. We will also review near misses, some case studies, and tips on how to prevent them. We will also discuss construction-related incidences, which resulted in injury, as well as we will cover their case studies, their causes, and how to prevent them. We will also cover construction-related incidences that resulted in a fatality. We will review their case studies, their causes, and how to prevent them as well. Over the years, we have collected data and have analyzed the trends to determine the top site safety violations issued on construction sites. This section will be a general overview, and we will discuss the potential safety hazards and how to prevent them. And most importantly, workers' rights. Here, we will discuss every worker's rights on a construction site and how to report unsafe working conditions. In the end, we will have a brief question and answer session. Any questions we didn't get to answer tonight will be posted with the presentation for everyone to review. So let's get started and discuss our first topic, Local Law 196 and site safety training. Due to the increased numbers of incidents in recent years, Local Law 196 of 2017 has been implemented. As a requirement of Local Law 196, worker at job sites requiring a construction superintendent, a site safety coordinator, or a site safety manager must have approved site safety training. Local Law 196 requires construction workers to have OSHA 30-hour training and an additional 10 hours of the Department of Buildings approved site safety training in order to work on a construction site or a demolition site. Another alternative to this requirement is to have completed the OSHA 10-hour training and take an additional 30 hours of approved Department of Building Safety training. Local Law 196 site safety training requirements can also be met by participating in the department's approved 100-hour training program. Please keep in mind, as of March 1st of 2021, a full site safety training requirement has been implemented and are being enforced. The site safety training requirements is the worker's card that shows the worker has participated in the combination of OSHA Hour 30, 8 hours of fall protection, and a 2-hour drug and alcohol awareness training. As previously mentioned, an alternative method to meeting the requirements is by taking the OSHA 10-hour training along with the Department of Buildings approved site safety trainings, which consist of 8 hours fall protection, 8 hours Chapter 33, 4 hours of supported scaffold, 2 hours of drug and alcohol awareness training, 4 hours of general electives, and 4 hours of specialized electives. Site safety managers, coordinators, supervisors, superintendents, and a designated competent person requires a 62-hour supervisor's SST card. The supervisor's SST card can be obtained by having or taking OSHA 30-hour training, as well as taking an additional 32 hours of DOB-approved electives. Site safety training cards are needed for all active construction sites, requiring a site safety professional. A site safety professional is mandatory for the following: A construction superintendent is required to oversee safety on construction sites up to 9 stories. A site safety coordinator is required to see construction from sites from 10 stories to 14 stories. A site safety manager is required to oversee safety on construction sites of buildings 15 stories and higher. Below is a link of the department's online map that shows active construction sites with a site safety professional requirement. Anyone can verify if their site requires an SST card. Local Law 196 identifies who requires a safety training. As the list shows, construction superintendents, site safety coordinators, site safety managers, competent persons, construction workers, and those are just to name a few. However, please note it also shows employees of DOB licensees and employees of DOB registrants. If a DOB licensee or registrant has a worker accompany them to a construction site and are actively engaged in construction activities, those unlicensed workers must be fully trained to work alongside the DOB licensee and the registrant. The New York City Department of Small Business Services offers free site safety training from the following partners organizations listed. For first-time construction workers, click on Workforce One Career Center's network link. For day laborers, the 5 boroughs each have a center dedicated to helping workers obtain the required trainings. Interested construction workers can register for more information by clicking on the link for the Career Discovery website. Day laborers who register for this site will be directed to one of the day labor organizations listed above. The Department of Small Business Services issues a full site safety training card that represents an individual has completed the 40 hours of required training to be designated on an SST construction work site. Individuals who want to obtain a Department of Small Business Service site safety training card can do so by meeting one of the 2 following criteria mentioned previously. Local Law 196 also identifies workers who don't require site safety training. That list includes building site owners, developers, project managers, and construction managers, delivery persons, flag persons, special inspectors, consultants, security guard officers, and service technicians. And those are just to name a few. An excellent example of not requiring site safety training on a construction site would be a company that is delivering appliances and are bringing them to a newly finished apartment. They would not be considered part of the active construction crew. Here, we are showing a few do's and don'ts for our site safety professionals. The do's consist of items as signing the logbook every day, maintaining a presence on the site while work is being performed, designating someone as a competent person in the absence of the construction super. Now keep in mind, construction supers are the only ones that can designate a competent person for their sites. When a construction super designates a competent person, they need to indicate who specifically is the competent person during their absence in the logbook. They must also have them sign and acknowledge that they are the competent person before leaving the site. Please note, the person picked to be the competent person must have the required supervisor's site safety training card. We will be discussing this in the upcoming slides. Additionally, site safety coordinators and site safety managers are required to maintain a presence during all construction activities. For don'ts, we want to remind you not to forget to sign the logbook. This is very important. It shows you were on site and performing your duties. Construction superintendents shall not leave the site without first designating a competent person. Construction superintendents shall not leave the site without documenting the competent person that is taking over for them. This is very important and we can't stress this enough. Site safety coordinators and site safety managers cannot leave their site during construction activities. A competent person can't just be anyone. A competent person is one who has a 62-hour site safety training supervisor's card and is capable of identifying existing and predictable hazards in the surrounding areas or working conditions, which are unsanitary or hazardous to employees, and who is authorized to make prompt corrective measures to eliminate them. Some do's to be aware of. If you are selected as the competent person, you need to maintain a safety presence at all times. Stay on site during active construction or until you are released from duty. Be knowledgeable in the construction activities being performed and keep up to date on trainings, as well as date and new means and methods in keeping up to date. Stop any unsafe activities. And some don'ts for being a competent person is don't ignore safety regulations, don't leave the site without being relieved, don't be inexperienced or novice, don't take on more than you can handle, and don't be afraid to report issues or concerns. Now remember, safety is everyone's priority. Moving along, we will now discuss COVID-19 New York State guidelines as it relates to active construction sites. We will cover in the following slides the site requirements, as well as the precautions you as a worker should take when working on an active construction site. Keep in mind, this should all be in place prior to you reporting to work by the employer. However, you should know what is required and how you can protect yourself and your co-workers from COVID. This will ensure the virus doesn't continue to get past the law. So let's get started. All employers are required to register and follow the New York State guidance prior to opening the construction site. These guides are set up for everyone's safety. These include completing and submitting the New York State Business Affirmation and must be posted at every individual active job site. Develop and maintain a COVID-19 site safety plan. Designating a COVID-19 site safety manager. Develop and maintain a COVID-19 communication plan. Develop and maintain a cleaning log. Develop and maintain a contact log. And post and maintain signage that is consistent with the Department of Health COVID-19 guidance. And as a reminder, all workers are required to wear face coverings unless medically prohibited. Compliance with the COVID guidance also requires hoists and elevators to have an occupancy no greater than 50% of the maximum allowed occupancy. A sign must be posted in each cab and every landing, stating the occupancy limit. A hand hygiene station with soap, water, and paper towels or hand sanitizer available on site, and signs reminding everyone to physically distance 6 feet apart when possible. This is an example of what the New York State Business Affirmation looks like. Again, this should be posted on the site and is required to be site-specific for every job site. Part of the safety template, the owner is required to provide all the information and the precautions they will take for all site activities. The plans are specific for each construction site. To name a few, each plan will identify the person responsible to ensure compliance with the COVID-19 safety plan, the owner information, along with all their contact information. Within the plan, the owner will explain how workers will be properly self-distancing, how meetings will be conducted safely, social distancing markers placed in common spaces, limit in-person gatherings, designated areas for pickups and deliveries, and post signage throughout the site consistent with the New York State Department of Health and Hygiene guidance. As hygiene is a key element to protecting everyone, the plan should include the cleaning information. Identify who is responsible for maintaining the cleaning logs and when the areas are cleaned, along with their frequencies. Remember, the best way to protect yourself is to wash your hands frequently with hot water and soap, or use hand sanitizer. When you return to an active construction site, the employer is required to provide all employees with proper PPE. This can consist of masks, eye coverings, and gloves, but keep in mind, all items are not to be shared with everyone. Limit sharing objects like tools or work gloves. Hand tools should be sanitized before sharing them with someone else. Part of the signs you will see around the construction site are also part of the COVID-19 safety plan. The employers are required to identify them and post them as required. It's your job to follow them to ensure for your safety as well as everyone else's safety. When you're on the site, you need to follow these signs to the best of your ability. Also, notify your employer if you test positive at any time. It's important that you tell them so others, which you may have been in close contact with, can get tested for COVID, and vice versa. Keep in mind, a COVID site safety manager is to be designated on every site. This role can be performed by site safety personnel such as the construction super, site safety coordinator, or site safety manager, or anyone with a site presence, including a construction worker. If you are going to be that person responsible for this role, ensure you know the tasks you need to perform and to always keep you and everyone on the site safe. And now, Patricia will discuss construction site near misses.
Thank you, Ozzy. As Ozzy mentioned, we will now discuss near misses. Near misses is one of the first indicators that a job site may need to be more diligent in the safety measures that are taken on the site. In this section, we will discuss what is a near miss and review case studies of installation failures, maintenance failures, material falls, worker falls, outriggers, and roof collapses, which could have been preventable. A near miss is an avoidable incident that did not result in any injuries or fatalities. Most incidents occur as a result of an unsafe act or unsafe conditions. Often, the end result is a person gets injured. Frequently, unsafe acts or hazardous conditions have several misfires, and the result is a near miss incident. The only difference between a near miss and an incident with injury or fatality is luck. Near misses are indicators in the workplace that must be identified and investigated to reduce overall incidents. If near misses are identified and corrected, future incidents with injuries or fatalities may be prevented. This is an installation failure which occurred in Manhattan. The roller mechanism of a corner angle suspended scaffold fell from the top of the building. The roller fell 61 stories. That is approximately a 730-foot drop. Fortunately, no one was injured. The investigation revealed that the suspended scaffold daily inspections were inadequate and improperly conducted. as all areas of the corner angle suspended scaffold were not documented. And in some cases, it was mentioned that the scaffold appeared to be operating well. Preventative measures could have included ensuring the installation of the corner angle scaffold followed the sequence set forth by the rigger, designer, and/or the manufacturer's specifications, as well as conducting inspections properly and documenting them accordingly. This is a maintenance failure near miss, which also took place in Manhattan. The site was a vacant lot with a construction fence installed. The construction fence partially collapsed onto the sidewalk, as you can see in the images. The remaining construction fence was loose and unstable, making the site not secured. As this was a vacant site, periodic inspections of the site should have been conducted, including, but not limited to, inspections after bad weather, high winds, or other DOB-issued advisories. These inspections ensure equipment and materials are properly secured and the general upkeep of the site is maintained. This material fall incident took place in April of last year, where a new building construction was installing curtain wall panels. As the corner angle scaffold passed a previously installed panel, the rollers bumped into the recently installed facade panels. The protective compressive foam sheets of the panels broke and fell on the street outside of the sidewalk shed. The size of the sheet was approximately 6 foot by 4 foot and a half-inch thick. Preventative measures should have included ensuring the sequence of work was followed, as well as following the manufacturer's recommendations, ensuring the proper connections and fasteners were used, and double-checking the installation before moving on to the next step. In this worker fall near miss, which took place in Manhattan of 2019, as a worker was installing a railing on a crane tie when he slipped and fell off the crane tower, as you can see in this video. Fortunately, the worker was wearing a personal fall arrest system. The harness and lifeline prevented him from falling to the ground. The other workers lowered the crane. The worker climbed onto the heading fall and was pulled up to the top of the tower crane. Wearing the harness and being tied off saved his life. In this material fall incident, while 2 workers were hoisting a precast panel, the rope disconnected and fell approximately 15 feet. The load fell because the rope end connection pin did not have a keeper installed. The pin became dislodged, which allowed the rope to disengage from the panel. The crane was hoisting a 12-foot by 60-foot precast panel weighing 33 tons and fell to the ground, damaging a trailer on site. When working with heavy machinery, tools, and materials, one of the best ways to prevent an incident from occurring is to inspect them before each use. All ropes should have a certification tag showing the capacities. Ensure the equipment and tools used are sufficient for the task at hand, and do not use underrated ropes or ropes without tags. Ensure the heavy machinery in use is appropriate for the load being lifted. Check the load capacity chart. Special attention should be given to inspecting connection pins and other mechanisms that are critical to maintaining control of the load. The area around an operating crane is a controlled access zone, and specific provisions should be made to protect workers, pedestrians, and equipment that are below. In this roof collapse near miss, 6 workers were working inside a house and performing interior demolition. A DOB inspector was just finishing an inspection across the street. He noticed the workers had removed the load-bearing walls supporting the roof. He yelled over and told the workers they needed to get out of the house. As the workers were coming out, the roof started to collapse. A preventative measure would have been to check with a licensed professional before demoing the interior walls and following the demolition sequence provided by the design professional. In June of 2017, a shoring failure near miss took place. In an effort to cut costs, the contractor chose to use 1 3/4 inch shores instead of the 3-inch shores that were called out for in the approved plans. The use of an undersized material caused a shoring failure. 6 workers fell 1 level below when it failed. The corrective measures call for the entire section to be cut out and redone according to the plan. In an effort to save money, the contracting team ended up spending more money in the long run. To prevent this incident from occurring, the contractor should have used the materials that were called out in the approved design drawings. At a mall in Brooklyn, at the delivery area on top of one of the stores, a brand new crane was totaled. Initially, the knuckle boom crane was being used with the outriggers extended. Close to lunchtime, a delivery truck arrived with roofing materials that could not get around the knuckle boom. The outriggers of the crane were blocking the delivery truck, so the workers withdrew the outriggers. The worker was in a rush and wanted to quickly complete his task, as it was almost lunchtime. The worker decided to continue working without re-extending the outriggers. The knuckle boom attempted to lift a load and became unbalanced as the boom was extended with the materials. Since the outriggers were not extended, the crane fell over on its unbalanced side. The crane was relatively new and was completely totaled from this incident. The incident could have been prevented if the outriggers were re-extended. Please keep in mind, when a situation changes the operation, before continuing, ensure all safety measures and precautions are reestablished when lifting a load. This concludes the near misses, and we will now present the section on construction-related incidents with injuries. Moving on to construction-related incidents with injury that resulted in an injury, we will review the incident, what caused them, and how they could have been prevented. This will be done through a review of case studies that have been collected. Please keep in mind, every site is different, and the preventative measures shown in this presentation may differ at every site. This graph shows the number of incidents with injury or fatality compared to the number of incidents without injury or fatality for each year. In 2017, we had 650 incidents with injury or fatality, and 12 of those were fatalities. In 2018, we had 746 incidents with injury or fatality, and 12 of those were fatalities. In 2019, we had 565 incidents with injury or fatality, and again, 12 of those were fatalities. And in 2020, we had 374 incidents with injury or fatality, and 8 of those were fatalities. As Local Law 196 of 2017 has been promoted, there has been an overall decrease in fatalities. This slide shows data of the top 5 incidents with injuries. We had 36% of injuries were related to slips, trips, and falls. 24% of injuries were related to lacerations. 23% of injuries were due to material fall struck by. 11% of injuries were associated with caught in between, and 6% of injuries were associated with ergonomic injuries. For this section of the presentation, we will only touch on lacerations, caught between, and ergonomic injury. We will touch on slips, trips, and falls, material fall and struck by, incidences in the fatality section of the presentation. Lacerations make up 24% of all incidents with injuries for this reporting period. This incident took place at a 15-story building in Queens of November 2020. The main cause of this injury was the worker was unable to keep both hands on the circular saw while cutting a backer board due to having insufficient workspace. The circular saw kicked back while the worker was performing the cut, lacerating his leg with the saw. Preventative measures for this incident would have included, but are not limited to, the worker should have had adequate space to perform his work tasks, ensuring clearance for cutting and supporting materials. The worker should have been properly trained in the use of the assigned tools, which includes understanding and complying with manufacturer's instructions and specifications, and keeping hands and body away from the line of cut. Finally, prior to the start of work activities, a pre-task meeting should be conducted, identifying all potential hazards and how to avoid incidences and injuries. Caught between makes up 11% of all incidents with injuries for this reporting period. Last year in Queens, while housekeeping operations was being performed in a small work area, a miscommunication took place between the flagger and the operator of the bobcat. The flagger got caught between the bobcat and the metal fence while the bobcat was in motion. Additionally, the site safety manager did not report the incident in a timely manner to the department. For this incident, the preventative measures should have included, but not limited to, adequate space to ensure the flagger was always in the line of sight of the operator, ensure flagger and operator were properly trained in communication methods and standards, setting up of a controlled access zone, conducting a pre-task meeting identifying hazards and how to avoid incidents and injuries. Ergonomic injury makes up 6% of all incidents with injury for this reporting period. Ergonomic injury is a musculoskeletal disorder that affects the muscles, nerves, blood vessels, ligaments, and tendons. Workers in many different industries and occupations can be exposed to risk factors at work, such as lifting heavy items, bending, reaching overhead, pushing and pulling heavy loads, working in an awkward body position, and performing the same or similar tasks repetitively. Exposure to these known risk factors for musculoskeletal disorders increase a worker's risk of injury. In this case that took place in Manhattan of 2020, while a worker was lifting and setting reinforced gypsum with his partner, the worker felt his lower back pull. The worker did not report the injury and continued to work the remainder of the day and the following 3 days. On the third day, after the worker's back feet was pulled, he re-injured his lower back while lifting materials. Preventative measures that should have taken place while lifting are limited but not limited to: don't reach for more than 10 inches away from your body. Don't twist your body while lifting. Lift with your legs, not your back. Keep your back as straight as possible. Lift the load using a solid two-handed grip. Keep the load close to your body when possible. Educate yourself in ergonomic techniques. The links provided will take you to an OSHA website specifically geared towards educating you on ergonomics and to the CDC Simple Ergonomic Solution for construction workers. These links will help you learn more about ergonomic injury and how to avoid them. Ozzy will now lead the discussion on construction-related fatalities.
Thanks, Patricia. So the next topic, we will discuss construction-related incidences that resulted in a fatality. We will review what caused them and how they could have been prevented. This will be done through a review of case studies that have been collected. Now, please keep in mind that every site is different, and the preventative measures shown in this presentation may differ at every site. This slide is showing the percentages of fatality for 2020. With the implementation of construction safety sweeps and Local Law 196, there was a reported 40% decrease from fatalities from 2019 to 2020. In 2020, we had a total of 8 fatalities reported for the year. That resulted in 50% related to a fall, and 38% related to a struck by, and 12% related to electrocution. As falls has the lead in our records for fatalities in 2020, coming at 50%, let's start with a fall incident case study. As stated, worker falls make up 50% of all fatalities for this reporting period. This incident took place while constructing a cast-in-place building in Brooklyn in July of 2020. The workers completed the 11th floor of the building and was in the process of relocating the guardrails on the exterior formwork onto the perimeter of the structure. The workers began installing the vertical netting, and while installing the vertical netting, a worker stepped on a section of the cantilevered formwork. At the same time, other workers working on the floor below were removing the shoring, which was supporting the same formwork. This formwork then collapsed, causing the worker on the formwork to fall 10 stories to the ground. So let's discuss what went wrong. The site-specific orientation, also known as toolbox talks for the workers, did not take place, nor did the pre-task meeting take place. The sequence of work for the removal of formwork was not discussed. The site safety plan was not being followed. The workers were not all wearing fall arrest systems, and horizontal netting was not in place as required. Preventative measures should have included, but not limited to, organized logistical sequence of operations, conducting pre-task meetings to identify the work hazards and how to prevent them, utilization of appropriate PPE for the work activities, and ensuring workers wear a personal arrest system when required. In this next incident, another fall fatality that took place in Brooklyn in August of 2020. This took place during a vertical enlargement operation. An existing 3-story building was being enlarged to a 4-story. While a worker was performing framing work on the 2nd floor, the worker lost his balance, and the worker fell from the 2nd story down the stairs to the 1st floor. So let's discuss what went wrong. The lack of proper work sequence, failure to create a control access zone, in addition to inadequate guardrails and failure to tie off were all contributing factors to this incident. Preventative measures should have included, but not limited to, holding a pre-task meeting to identify hazards and discuss how to prevent them, ensuring workers know the proper sequence of work and are following them, ensuring fall protection measures are in place, and making sure the workers are properly trained in fall protection and other safety measures. This fall fatality occurred in Manhattan in March of 2020. While a guard was waiting to be able to walk across the site where work was being performed, the guard leaned against an unsecured guardrail and fell 62 feet down the mechanical shaft. It was found that earlier that day, the guardrail was removed to be able to perform work in that specific area. And when the work was completed, the guardrail was reinstalled. However, it was missing sections of the guardrails, and it was installed and reinstalled in a loose manner. This reinstallation did not meet the guardrail requirements for the proper safety protocols. So let's examine what went wrong. The guardrails were not properly reinstalled, it was missing a section, and was left loose, nor was it re-inspected to ensure it met safety standards. So some preventative measures that could have been performed are, after the workers reinstalled the guardrails, the designated safety professional should have checked the installation to ensure that safety was in compliance. Everyone who is going to be present on the job site should receive training for fall protection and tripping hazards, and should be able to identify hazards and how to report them. Again, remember, safety starts with you. This incident was also a fall fatality that occurred in Brooklyn in November of 2020. A foreman and worker were dismantling a scaffold and erecting the scaffold frame by passing the planks in order to provide a working area on the upper frame. While the workers were performing the work, the worker stepped out on an unsupported plank overhang and fell. That worker fell 40 feet down. So let's look at what went wrong. The deck planks were not checked or verified before putting weight on it. And the preventative measures that should have been put in place are, but not limited to, ensuring the workers are wearing a fall arrest system. All workers should have been properly trained on safety measures. In particular, for this specific operation, a pre-shift task meeting to identify hazards and discuss the dangers involved with the task to avoid them. In this slide, we are showing the right and wrong ways of donning a harness. Ensure you are wearing the harness correctly. The D-ring should be in the middle of your back, directly between your shoulder blades. Stand up straight and adjust the length of the side body straps as needed to make sure that there is no slack. Fasten the chest straps and about mid-chest high and adjust and remove any slack. Make sure the shoulder straps and the leg straps are snug while still allowing full range of motion. Make sure the loose ends of the straps are tucked into the strap retainers. And with your hand held flat, you should be able to fit your fingers underneath the leg straps. Now we will look at material falls and struck-bys that make up 38% of fatalities of the reporting period. This incident took place in Queens in February of 2020. Workers were performing demolition operations. As a robotic arm was chipping the concrete surrounding the beam, a worker was cutting the rebar as it was being exposed. After cutting one of the beam's rebars, the beam rolled off the support columns and pulled the wall down on top of the workers who were working below. So what went wrong with this? The investigation of this incident determined a failure to follow proper demolition sequence, work was contrary to the approved plans, and failure to shore and brace the beams all contributed to this fatality. It was also found the site safety logs were missing on site. To help prevent these incidents from occurring, and this particular instance as well, the approved plans should have been followed along with the demolition sequence. Shoring and bracing should have been put in place prior to the start of the demolition operations. Having pre-task shift meetings to discuss the hazards and dangers associated with the work prior to commencing the work itself. This material fall incident occurred in Manhattan in July of 2020. It was an 11-story building where a worker on a suspended scaffold was lowering the scaffold at the end of the workday. While the scaffold was descending, a large section of cornice separated from the building and fell on top of him, and then striking the scaffold. The impact then caused the cornice and the scaffold to fall onto the sidewalk shed and further damaging 20 feet of the installed shed. In addition to the worker who succumbed to his injuries, 3 other workers also suffered injuries as well. What went wrong? The failure to institute adequate safety measures during construction operations was a contributing factor to this fatality. Preventative measures should have included, but again, not limited to, having a proper inspection of surrounding structures to ensure stability, ensuring the scaffold is checked daily and maintained in good operating condition, ensure site safety plans are being followed, and review all possible hazards and dangers at pre-task meetings and how to prevent them from occurring. This caught-in-between incident took place in Brooklyn in December of 2020. Workers were attempting to repair a retaining wall by the way of the neighbor's yard. The workers dug several feet down along the length of the retaining wall. The retaining wall was undermined by the construction excavation and collapsed on top of the workers below. And just to give you an idea of what 1 cubic yard of soil weighs, it can weigh as much as 2,200 pounds. Preventative measures for this incident should have included the existing retaining wall, which was not constructed properly and should have been evaluated. Shoring and bracing was not installed during the excavation being performed. The workers should have obtained a valid DOB permit, obtained DOB approval on construction documents, as well as obtain appropriate training for workers as well, and following sequence of shoring and bracing, and it should be shown on the department's approved drawings. And lastly, at 12% are electrocutions. This incident took place in Brooklyn in June of 2020. On the second floor of a 2-story building, a non-licensed worker was installing new junction boxes, new BX cable, new recessed lights. And while cutting what appeared to be an old connection to a junction box, which happened to still be alive, he cut the live wire, and the electrical current passed through the tool and continued to pass through his body. As the current was following the path of least resistance, it ultimately electrocuted him. A DOB permit was not obtained, which in turn means the appropriate construction documents were never created for this work. In addition to not following the proper procedures for obtaining approval to perform the work was also being performed by an unlicensed worker. The preventative measures for this incident should have been included, but not limited to, obtaining required permits with the Department of Buildings, obtaining appropriate training, set up temporary power, and ensure all power sources to the work areas are shut off, and conduct a pre-task meeting to identify and mitigate hazards. Patricia will now continue the discussion on top 10 site safety monitoring violations that have been issued in 2020.
Thanks, Ozzy. As stated, we will discuss the top 10 site safety monitoring violations issued in 2020 and learn the reasons they were issued and how to prevent them. The top 10 violations issued for site safety monitoring are as follows. 26% of violations issued were due to work does not conform to approved documents. 16% of the violations issued were due to site failure to maintain or display safety documents as required by Chapter 33. 10% of the violations are due to construction superintendent failure to perform duties. 10% of the violations issued were due to the job site fence was not maintained per code. 9% of the violations were issued due to failure to comply with the fire code. 8% of the violations were issued due to failure to protect adjacent property. 6% of the violations issued were due to failure to maintain scaffolds per code. 5% of the violations were issued due to failure to obtain required training. 5% of violations were issued due to temporary construction equipment on site expired. And the last 5% of the violations were issued due to failure to install or maintain guardrails. Failure to follow approved drawings is topping the most issued violations at 26% in 2020. An example of this type of violation took place in September, where a contractor failed to construct the guardrail according to the approved drawings, and a worker fell off the scaffolding all the way to the ground. The worker was on the roof of a 3-story building and was working on a parapet, when the worker fell in between the scaffold and the facade, landing on the lawn below. The worker's right leg and both hands broke from the fall. Although the scaffold and sidewalk shed permits were valid and the design drawings were on site, the drawings were not followed during the installation of the scaffold. The installed scaffold was missing guardrails and planks. Additionally, lifelines were not present, and the worker was not tied off. Typical reasons why failure to follow approved drawings are issued: excavation work is performed and appropriate SOE or angle of repose is not constructed per the drawings. The drawings on site were not specific for the work taking place. Changes were made to the original drawings without going through the required approval process and just not following the drawings. Preventative measures that could have been implemented in this case study are including, but not limited to, conducting a pre-shift meeting and toolbox talk to discuss the hazards and dangers and how to avoid them. Always construct a scaffold and other structures according to the approved drawings. Ensure the approved plans are on site. If the plans are not on site, the plans cannot be followed. For this case study in particular, additional fall protection measures should have been in place. Installed guardrails when working on an elevated surface of 6 feet or higher. Workers should wear appropriate personal protective equipment for the operation being performed. Failure to maintain safety documents. Second most commonly issued site safety monitoring violation at 16%. In this particular instance, this was an active job site located in Brooklyn. Not only were the required safety logs missing, so were the design drawings. In a 4-month time frame, this site has been issued 2 separate stop work orders, has had repeated violations for the construction fence not maintained, and had to stop work due to construction superintendent leaving the job. The site was also issued violations for housekeeping, not maintaining fire extinguishers on site, and for work without a permit. At the time of the monitoring inspection, the construction superintendent was unable to produce the construction documents as required by Chapter 33, Building Code 3301.7. It was also noticed that part of the construction fence was missing, the housekeeping was inadequate, and there were no fire extinguishers on site as required by the fire code. Ultimately, this led to issuing a stop work order on the site. Failure to maintain safety documents falls under Building Code 3301.7. The following construction documents must be kept on site at all times: drawings, inspection reports, logs, checklists, site safety plans, fire, safety, and evacuation plans, tenant protection plans, occupant protection plans, monitoring plans. Copies of such shall be maintained at the site for the duration of the job and made available upon request. To prevent a failure to maintain safety documents violation from being issued, ensure required construction documents such as design drawings and site safety logs are maintained and on site at all times. This site should have also ensured the construction fence was installed and maintained per code, fire extinguishers were on site and maintained, checking them monthly, and making sure housekeeping was performed daily. Failure to perform duties is another commonly issued violation at 10%. This incident took place in Brooklyn. A worker was buried by a collapsed wall. When the emergency personnel arrived, the construction superintendent was not present. The construction superintendent arrived much later into the rescue operation. It took 3 days of rescue operations to recover the body of the trapped worker. The workers shored and braced the existing wall of the building. However, they did not fully shore and brace the underpinning that was exposed due to the over-excavation. It was over-excavated by 14 feet. The bottom underpin started to collapse, which led to the wall collapsing. Ultimately, 25 tons of concrete fell on the worker. One of the violations issued to this site was failure to perform duties. Common reasons why this violation is issued: the site safety professional was not on location at the time of the inspection. The site safety professional did not sign the logbook. The site safety professional failed to designate a competent person. And failure to ensure appropriate safety measures are being followed. Preventative measures that should have taken place in this instance are including, but not limited to, maintaining a site safety presence, following the approved plans, ensuring workers are properly trained in the construction activities taking place, such as excavation, underpinning, and bracing. Shoring and bracing of the entire wall should have taken place, not just a section of the wall. Failure to maintain construction fence is the fourth most issued violation at 10%. This particular violation was issued at a site where work was being performed on a vacant 3-story structure. A construction fence was erected along the side of a building. The supported scaffold had been erected in the rear of the building on the 1st-story level roof. As a pedestrian was walking by the construction fence, a 30-foot section of the fence fell on the pedestrian, injuring them. As the investigation took place, it was also noticed that the scaffolding was not secured and not plumbed. The requirements to maintain a construction fence is detailed in Building Code 3307.7. All sites where a new building is being constructed or a building is being demolished to grade shall be enclosed with a fence. Fences shall also be installed to fully or partially enclose sites as necessary where there exists an open excavation, an unenclosed portion of the building accessible at grade, or other hazards to the public. The details of how to maintain a fence will be covered in the next slide under prevention methods. In order to prevent a violation for failure to maintain a construction fence, the following should be adhered to. Periodically inspect the construction fence, ensuring it is per code. The construction fence should be built solid and at 8 feet high. The sides of the construction fence should fully return, enclosing the entire site. The fence should be without loose boards, without splinters, and nails and other fasteners should not be protruding from the construction fence. Viewing panels are to be 12 inches by 12 inches and blocked with plexiglass or equivalent non-frangible material. Viewing panels should also be located every 25 linear feet. Here, we are comparing different sites and how the fences were maintained. The picture on the left shows a properly installed and maintained construction fence. The fence is 8 foot high. It is built solid, painted hunter green, and has the viewing panels at every 25 linear feet, and meets all other requirements as specified by the code. The picture on the right, as we can see, is not properly installed nor maintained, as it has collapsed. Failure to comply with fire code makes up 9% of the most issued violations. This violation took place last year in Manhattan at a 12-story new building construction, where welding was being performed nearby when the insulation adjacent to it caught on fire. Fortunately, the workers were able to put out the fire. The cause of this fire was due to performing hot work operations near combustible materials. Prior to the start of the hot work, workers were to remove the combustible materials from the vicinity of the work area, per the hot work permit. While welding and torching operations were taking place, the insulation material, which was not removed, caught on fire. Failure to comply with the fire code accounts for 9% of the violations issued. It falls under Building Code 3303.7. Fire prevention and fire protection requirements are as follows. Firefighting equipment, firefighting access at the construction or demolition site, and the conduct of all construction or demolition operations affecting fire prevention and firefighting shall comply with the New York City Fire Code and the provisions of sections 3303.7.1 through 3303.7.5. These building codes include details on water supply, fire extinguishers, smoking, sprinkler systems, and standpipe requirements. Common reasons why failure to comply with fire code violations are issued: inadequate number of fire guards performing additional duties, fire extinguishers are not checked or not on site, combustible materials not removed prior to the start of hot work operations. In order to prevent receiving violations for failure to comply with fire code, pre-task meetings should discuss all hazards that can occur on the job site and how to eliminate the hazards and dangers. Fully understand the requirements of the hot work permit if you are the fire guard, operator, or the designated site safety personnel. Training workers on the hazards of their tasks and how to identify and avoid those hazards. New York City Fire Code requires that a fire guard is present during hot work operations. One fire guard is required per spark producing tool. Examples of a spark producing tool are torch, chop saw, grinder. A fire guard may not perform other work except for the fire guard duties. An additional fire guard is required when the operation is not observable by a single individual. The picture on the left shows a fire guard who is well prepared, standing guard at the ready in case a fire starts due to the sparks. The image on the right shows hot work operations taking place without the required fire guard. Failure to maintain scaffold is the 6th of 10 most commonly issued violations at 6%. This example of a failure to maintain scaffold took place in Brooklyn in May of 2020. The building is a 2-story, 45-foot building that was enlarged vertically to a 7-story, 145-foot building at roof level and partially enclosed. While a worker was performing taping operations via Baker scaffolds, the worker fell approximately 6 feet, injuring himself. The worker was using a Baker scaffold to perform taping operations. The Baker scaffold did not have guardrails, nor was the worker wearing a fall arrest system to help prevent him from falling all the way to the floor. The worker fell approximately 6 feet from the scaffold. The worker broke his ankle and injured his arms and back. Again, failure to maintain scaffolds is 6% of the violations issued for 2020. BC 3314.4.8 states, all components of and attachments to the scaffold and all supports and anchorage of the scaffold installed at a site shall be maintained in good condition by a qualified person. Individuals maintaining a scaffold shall have been trained in accordance with section 3314.4.5. Individuals who maintain an adjustable suspended scaffold hoist shall have also been trained and authorized by the manufacturer of the hoist. A description of the maintenance shall be recorded, signed, and dated by the person who performs the maintenance and kept with the inspection checklist or reports required by sections 3314.4.3.4 or 3314.4.3.5 are related to pre-shift inspection requirements for supports and suspended scaffolds. Common reasons for issuing failure to maintain a scaffold are excessive overhang, scaffold not tight to the work area, it should be a 1-inch gap or less, if the decks are not fully planked, if the scaffold is not tied to the building. Let's review preventative methods that could have taken place, including, but not limited to, work activity, the hazards and prevention techniques should have been discussed at the pre-task meeting. Workers using a scaffold should complete their scaffold training as part of the site safety training card requirement. Additionally, scaffolds should have guardrails or workers should be tied off. The image on the left is showing a suspended scaffold correctly installed. However, the image on the right is showing an installed suspended scaffold that is missing the softener required to protect the ropes from fraying from the friction of the scaffold movement. Failure to obtain required training violations makes up 5% of the most issued violations. This violation not only relates to site safety training, but also to training of equipment and machinery usage. In Brooklyn, an untrained carpenter was using an electric circular saw to cut a piece of plywood. The saw kicked back, and the carpenter's left index finger was amputated. As more questions were asked, it was discovered the worker was not trained on how to use the circular saw. The worker was unaware of any potential kickback from the circular saw. As previously stated, failure to obtain required training is 5% of the issued site safety violations. Construction can be an inherently dangerous job. However, the risks can be minimized and potentially eliminated when a worker is properly trained. Violations for failure to obtain required training are usually issued when failure to ensure each worker has successfully completed the required site safety training or training on machinery and tool usage, buying training cards without the proper training, having a counterfeit card provided to you. DOB can identify those counterfeit cards. Preventative measures can include, but are not limited to, training workers can minimize and eliminate the risks when the worker is properly trained. Training takes place by attending specialized training classes, but also by receiving daily pre-shift meeting and toolbox talks. At those times, hazards are to be identified and workers are trained on how to identify and prevent them. Before using machinery and equipment, if you are unfamiliar with it, it is important to be trained on how to use them. This will help prevent an incident from taking place. On the left, workers are being trained on the use of hand tools during a pre-shift meeting. On the right, a worker is using a saw unsafely. This is blatantly not the right thing to do. Most people would not be used as a table saw. However unreal this photo may be, not being properly trained on tools, equipment, and safety requirements will certainly lead to injury. Failure to maintain temporary construction equipment permits is also 5% of the most issued site safety violations. This case, which took place in Queens in April, an inspector was conducting a routine monitoring inspection. It was discovered that the temporary construction permit was expired. And it turns out that the site safety plans also did not adequately meet the conditions of the site. Temporary construction equipment permit can include permits for sidewalk sheds, construction fence, and machinery, and etc. Failure to maintain equipment permits falls under Building Code 3301.2, Safety Measures and Standards. Contractors, construction managers, and subcontractors engaged in construction or demo operations shall institute and maintain all safety measures required by this chapter, Chapter 33. Provide all equipment and temporary construction necessary to safeguard the public and property affected by such contractors' operations. And this common violation also falls under Administrative Code 105.8.2, Term of Permit, which states, notwithstanding any other provision of this code, a construction equipment permit shall expire 1 year from the date of issuance, or when the permit holder's insurance or street obstruction bond expires, whichever is earlier. Common reasons for issuing violations for failure to maintain equipment permits are not renewing sidewalk shed permit prior to its expiration, not renewing a construction fence permit prior to its expiration, having machinery on site with an expired permit. Preventative measures for failure to maintain temporary construction equipment permits has expired are including, but not limited to, site safety representative should keep track of the permit expiration dates, renew permit prior to the expiration of the permit, maintain necessary insurance as permits will no longer be valid if the insurance lapses. The last top 10 commonly issued site safety violations is failure to install guardrails, which is 5% of the violations issued. This incident took place in Brooklyn. A worker fell down a shaft when he was preparing to start work. The worker fell 9 feet through the shaft to the cellar floor and suffered a critical injury. The worker was preparing to start masonry work around a stair shaft when he removed the guardrails from the edges of the shaft. There were no other safety measures in place, which could have consisted of a controlled access zone or effective fall protection for performing work on a leading edge. The worker was not using a safety harness, nor did he have an anchor point. Failure to install and maintain guardrails is 5% of the most commonly issued violations. This violation falls under Building Code 3301.2 and Building Code 3308.7. The code requires guardrails when working above 6 feet. Guardrails are physical barriers to ensure that workers don't fall into holes or off the leading edge. Common reasons for issuing violations for no guardrails are: guardrails are not in place at the time of the inspection, guardrails are not able to withstand the 200 pounds of force per code, and any elevated platform over 6 feet where other types of approved fall protection are not in place. Preventative measures to be considered include, but are not limited to, daily pre-shift meeting and toolbox talks, install guardrails when openings are created, and do not move guardrails when it is in place unless necessary. In lieu of guardrails, a controlled access zone should be set up and tie-offs should be provided. Ensure workers are wearing appropriate PPE when on site. Ensure all workers are aware of openings with signage and other indicators. On the left, we can see an excavation that has supportive excavation and guardrails. The guardrails are built appropriately with top and mid rails and toe boards. On the right, there is an inadequately installed guardrail, as section of the guardrails are missing the mid rail. Ozzy will now discuss workers' rights.
Now we will touch on reporting safety issues, how to protect yourself, and how to report any incidences. First and foremost, workers have the right to a safe workplace. In order to ensure worker safety, workers have the right to receive training and information on hazards and how to prevent them. Workers have the right to review records of work-related injuries and illnesses that occurred in the workplace and receive copies of test results and copies of the monitoring performed to find and measure workplace hazards. Workers have the right to receive copies of workplace medical records as well. Workers have the right to participate in an OSHA investigation. Most importantly, workers have the right to report hazards and safety concerns without fear of retaliation. The first step in keeping yourself safe is by being aware of your surroundings and knowing what is going on around you. It is important for you to know your rights, and one of your rights is to have the right to work in a safe environment. You can keep safe by being trained. To name a few, site safety training such as fall protection, scaffolding training, but also training on how to use your tools, equipment, and machinery correctly. If you feel you are working on an unsafe construction site, one that has hazardous conditions, that is placing you at risk, you can lodge an anonymous complaint with 311. If you would like to report an incident or unsafe condition, please call 911 if it's an emergency. If it's not an emergency, please reach out to the DOB by calling 311 or call DOB directly at 212-602-0431. If any incidences take place at your work site, please notify your safety professional and your supervisor if any. Stay at the site until a safety investigator arrives and provides direction. If you would like to learn more about your rights, visit nyc.gov/NYC-SAFETY. For more information regarding worker safety, please go to the link shown. If you have any questions regarding training requirements, please contact the Department of Buildings. You can also email Local Law 196 at buildings.nyc.gov with your questions. So this ends our worker safety presentation overview.